Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today we'll be talking about Logias. Specifically, we'll be reviewing how Logia's powers actually work, as well as going over some silly arguments that usually come up in cross-anime versus battle discussions that involve Logias. Now the reason I thought this necessary is because even though there are a lot of hacks in the One Piece verse, the one that seems to drive most non-One Piece fans crazy is the fact that Logias are literally invulnerable to almost all normal physical attacks. And many anime verses don't have a hacky equivalent technique to combat these hacks, and quite a few Logias don't even have an elemental weakness. So a lot of characters from other verses literally can't even touch most Logias, and this fact seems to drive some people so crazy that it leads them to come up with patently absurd arguments like saying that you can hurt Logias with brute force alone if the brute force is strong enough. Now this is obviously pretty silly, but let us properly explore this topic that I dub the Logia Problem. Now, before we get into the actual mechanism of Logias, let us quickly review what Logias actually are. So there are two major power systems in the One Piece world. One power system is Haki, which is a vague metaphysical energy type power system that is similar to concepts like aura, spirit, and willpower. The second power system is a devil fruit based power system. Now exactly what devil fruits are is not known. However, we know they come in three main classes. The first class is the Zoan class, which allows a user to turn into a specific animal. The second class is the Paramecia class, which is a kind of basket class that includes everything outside of the Zoan and Logia classes. Then the third class, and the focus of this video, is the Logia class, which allows the user to turn their body into, create, and control a specific natural element. Now, the exact mechanism of how devil fruits work is not known. However, based on Vegapunk's experiments on Kaido, we know that devil fruits seem to grant these powers, at least in part, by affecting a person's lineage factor or bloodline elements. That is, the blueprint of life itself. You'll even note that a DNA helix is used to represent the lineage factor. So devil fruits literally alter an individual down to a fundamental level. So understand, Aokiji who ate the ice fruit is not using chakra-derived ice jutsu like Haku from Naruto, or mana-derived ice magic like Heath Grease from Black Clover. No, Aokiji himself, down to a fundamental level, is literally the solid, tangible, natural thing known as ice. And similarly, Akainu who ate the magma fruit is not using chakra-derived magma jutsus like Mei from Naruto. No, Akainu himself, down to a fundamental level, is literally the semi-solid natural thing known as magma. And Kizaru who ate the light fruit is not using mana-derived light magic like Licked from Black Clover, or chakra-derived light jutsus like Madara's Light Fang from Naruto. Again, no, Kizaru himself, down to a fundamental level, is literally the particulate, intangible, natural thing known as light. Now I'm sorry for stressing this so much, but it is very important that you understand that Logias are not some replicas of these natural elements, but rather, down to a fundamental level, Logias are the literal true natural elements themselves. So given that Logias by their very nature are literally a certain element, they thus literally have all those elements' properties. So Kizaru who ate the light fruit literally is light and thus has the properties of light. One such property of light is intangibility, which means he can literally just stand still and do absolutely nothing, and most attacks will just go right through him. So as you could imagine, if a literal property of your body is that you cannot be touched, that in itself would grant you almost complete invulnerability, being that an attack typically needs to be able to interact with you before it can even have a chance of hurting you. But this isn't actually why a Logia is nearly invincible. It is only part of the story. For example, Scratchman Appo's attacks are unique in that once you hear it, it just automatically takes effect. And thus through this mechanism, Appo's attack was able to bypass Kizaru's intangibility and actually interact with Kizaru's body, cutting off his arm and literally blowing his body into pieces, resulting in his upper body being literally separated from his lower body. So through this special automatic mechanism of his attack, he was able to satisfy the first condition of actually interacting with Kizaru's body rather than his attacks just going right through, as we had seen with Brook's sword attacks and Usopp's explosive pellets. Yet you'll note that despite this, he wasn't actually able to hurt Kizaru. Kizaru was absolutely uninjured and he just casually reformed his body as if nothing had happened at all. So this is actually the fundamental point that you need to understand. The reason why Kizaru can't normally be hurt is not just because you can't normally touch him. No. Being able to interact with Kizaru's body is merely the first obstacle that an attack needs to be able to overcome to even have a chance of hurting him. But the actual fundamental reason why Kizaru can't normally be hurt is because even if you find a way to interact with his body, that doesn't change the fact that light isn't a thing that has the property of being able to be hurt. So even though Scratchman's Apple's attack, through its special mechanism, was able to pass the first obstacle of actually interacting with Kizaru's body, all he accomplished was just cutting and blowing apart light. His attack did not address the fundamental problem that Kizaru is light and light cannot be hurt. So this is why you usually cannot hurt Logias, even the ones who have elements that you can normally touch. Take Aokiji for example, who we know is the Ice Logia. Ice is a solid element, thus unlike light you can usually touch it under normal circumstances. So whereas a regular bullet or a regular sword attack or any other regular physical attack literally just goes through Kizaru without him having to do anything at all, for Aokiji, a regular physical attack like a punch under normal circumstances would obviously physically impact with him. And again, this is because ice is solid, therefore it does not require any special mechanism to normally touch it. But you'll note that even after being completely broken apart by Robin, Aokiji just casually reforms, having sustained no damage whatsoever. The same is true after being broken up into even finer pieces by Luffy. So again, the fundamental reason you cannot hurt a Logia is because natural elements such as ice or magma or light do not have the property of being able to be hurt. And then compounded onto this is that there are some Logias like Kizaru and Enel who have the additional property of intangibility, so it is hard for an attack to even touch them in the first place. So given that you now understand why a Logia is nearly invincible, you should also now understand what an attack requires to actually hurt a Logia. But just in case it is not clear to you, let us go through it by using Haki as an example. Now, Haki, as we already described, is a metaphysical energy-based power that can be superimposed onto or modify any regular attack. And through this infusion of Haki, a regular attack is granted the ability to interact in two ways that solves the two obstacles of a Logia's invulnerability. So firstly, Haki allows the attack to physically interact with things in ways that it would not normally be able to physically interact with them. So to understand what I mean by this, let us take the example of Smoker, who ate the smoke fruit and thus is a smoke man. So surely you would understand that you can't normally interact with smoke in the same way that you can interact with a rock. Like, you can normally grab onto and hold a rock for example, but you can't normally grab onto or hold smoke. Your hand would obviously just go right through. Even with liquids like water for example, you can actually touch and hold water in your hand, but you can't usually interact with smoke like this, being that it is a gas. So this is what it means when we say you can't touch smoke. And this is why when pre-timeskip Sanji tried to kick Smoker, his kick just went right through. Similarly, when pre-timeskip Luffy tried to punch Smoker, his punches also just went right through. And if you try to cut him, that also just goes right through. So like Kizaru, Smoker is the type of Logia that you have to solve the first obstacle of even being able to touch him in the first place, before you can even think about hurting him. But with Armament Haki, you gain this interaction ability. So as we can see here, using Armament Haki, Luffy is literally able to grab onto and hold smoke, thus treating a gas as if it were a solid. Now note, Smoker's arm is clearly still in its gaseous form here. The Armament Haki is merely allowing Luffy to interact with the gaseous smoke as if it were a solid. So that's the first obstacle passed. Touch the untouchable. The second interaction function of Armament Haki is that it allows you to interact with the fundamental essence of a thing. This solves the second and the fundamental obstacle of a Logia's invulnerability. To understand what I mean by this, let us take a look at Aokiji once more. So as we had said before, ice is something that you can usually touch. So even a pre-time skip Nico Robin, who cannot use armament haki, was able to interact with and completely shatter Aokichi's body using a normal physical attack. But as we said, it didn't actually hurt Aokichi. But fast forward to the Marineford arc, and we see where Jozu using an armament haki imbued slam shattered Aokichi, and when Aokichi reformed, he was visibly hurt. So how can this make sense if we're saying that the reason why attacks don't hurt Aokiji in the first place is because ice doesn't have the property of being able to be hurt? Again, to understand this, you need to remember what a Logia actually is. Aokiji is literally the element of ice, but he's also actually a human. He is an ice human. But the problem is, the human part of him is buried at a metaphysical level within the ice. So normal attacks like Nico Robin's clutch can only interact with Aokiji at a physical level. Thus they can only interact with the ice part of him that cannot be hurt. These normal attacks that can only act at a physical level do not have the ability to interact with the human part of Aokiji that can be hurt, because this part of him is buried within the ice at a metaphysical level. So to actually hurt Aokiji, you need a special method that is able to interact with him beyond just a physical level. You need to be able to interact with his essence beyond the ice, and Armament Haki provides this means of interaction. That is why Jozu using a physical attack was able to hurt Aokiji, whereas Nico Robin could not, because Armament Haki allowed Jozu to interact with the human essence rather than just the ice. And as you also now should understand, this is also why even attacks with special mechanisms like Scratchman Apple's attacks, which automatically passes the first obstacle of being able to interact with Kizaru's body, was still not able to hurt Kizaru, because again, it was only able to physically interact with Kizaru, and thus could only interact with the light part of Kizaru. To actually hurt Kizaru, Scratchman's Apple's attack would need the additional property of being able to interact with the human essence of Kizaru that is buried within the light at a metaphysical level. So when you see things like Rayleigh cutting Kizaru's cheek using an Armament Haki sword attack, know that two things are happening. Firstly, the Haki is allowing his sword to physically interact with light as if it were a solid, instead of just going right through, as we saw when Brook tried to cut Kizaru or when a random guy fired a bullet at Kizaru. And secondly, the Haki allows the sword to interact with the human essence of Kizaru that is buried within the light at a metaphysical level, thus actually hurting Kizaru and making him bleed. And an elemental weakness such as Luffy or Rubberman being able to actually hit and actually hurt Inelli Lightning Man, and because rubber doesn't conduct electricity, is just a special rule that Oda added to have this Haki-like interaction effect without having to use Haki for some Logias. So now that you understand why a Logia is nearly invincible, as well as what an attack requires to be able to hurt a Logia, let us now go through some of the silly arguments that usually come up in cross-anime versus battle discussions. Now the primary offender, and my personal pet peeve, is the "but what about water though" argument. Now this comes about because, as we all know, upon eating a devil fruit, the user becomes weak to water. This is expressed in the form of them losing their ability to swim, and them becoming substantially weaker when they are partially or fully submerged to the point where they can barely move their body. Now a lot of people see this and just go wild without taking into account actual context. So it is a fact that on paper, water is a devil fruit user's weakness. But in practice, things just are not that simple. And that is especially the case when dealing with high tier Logias. So firstly, let's get the most ridiculous thing out of the way. Just touching water does not weaken a devil fruit user. For a devil fruit user to be fully incapacitated by water, most or all of their body needs to be submerged within it. And if a particular limb is significantly submerged in water, then this saps away at the devil fruit user's strength. But they can still move, and in some instances they can even carry out an attack. Luffy, for example, has been shown to carry out a Gear 3 punch against Tsureme with his hand completely submerged underwater. Secondly, moving water like rain or waves does not weaken a devil fruit user. It is standing water like rivers and lakes that does this. This was both stated in an interview by Oda and is clearly shown in the anime and manga. Smoker has been shown to use his smoke powers in Heavy Rain with no problems whatsoever. Well, that is until Dragon showed up. And Luffy, who was also in this Heavy Rain, was also shown to be using his powers just fine with no indication of being weakened. As a matter of fact, Luffy has also been shown to be completely showered by a flood of seawater that Zunisha used to bathe itself, and he gave no indication of him being weakened or his powers being sapped away. So we aren't just depending on the author's words, the actual material backs up what he's saying. Now what is relevant to us is as it relates to battles. So let's take my Admirals versus Ninjas battle, because the Admirals are high tier Logias. So one of the arguments which repeatedly came up is someone inevitably asking, but what about water though? Whether that be in the form of one of the ninjas using a water style jutsu, or Minato or Madara teleporting the Admirals to a body of water. Now as it relates to forced teleportation, as already said, forced teleportation does not work on high-level haki users, but let us disregard that for this discussion. Now this is why context matters. Aokiji has been shown to instantly freeze 4 days walking worth of sea, and he has also been shown to freeze 2 giant tsunamis in a matter of seconds. As a matter of fact, at Marineford, even when he's knocked out of the sky by Whitebeard and he falls onto the water in the port, all of the water in the port instantly freezes as his broken body falls onto it. So for a person to then say that a water clone, or a water style dragon jutsu, or any shown water style jutsu in Naruto, or forced teleportation to a random water body would have even the slightest impact on Aokiji is just so misguided. Water instantly freezes when it comes close to, much less in contact with this man. I mean, this is a guy who travels by riding his bicycle across the ocean for Pete's sake. It is almost impossible for any water attack to have any impact on him due to his abilities. And most high tier Logias are like this. An average water style jutsu would literally just pass right through an intangible Logia like Kizaru and Enel. And even if the entire battlefield was flooded, Enel can literally exist in and move through the clouds as lightning, and Kizaru can literally move through the air as literal light. There is no hitting or trapping them. And in the face of a Logia like Akainu, who can literally permanently set water on fire and form multiple volcanoes, most water jutsus or attacks would instantly evaporate if it were even able to get close to him, much less touch him. And even if the entire battlefield was flooded, he could literally make land because cool magma is solid. Now I won't go through every high tier Logia because that would take a while, but by now I'm hoping it's clear that even though on paper water is a devil fruit user's weakness, that is just on paper. In actual practice, for most high tier Logias, it is nothing but a mild inconvenience. So I'm really hoping we can drop this reactionary "but what about water though" argument and reserve it for the cases where it is actually relevant. Now the second argument that often comes up is the elemental weakness argument. Now nothing is intrinsically wrong with this. Luffy versus Crocodile and Luffy versus Enel have established that some Logia devil fruits have certain elemental weaknesses whereby you can touch and hurt them without armament haki. So for example, you can touch and hurt Crocodile, who is a sandman, if you attack him while being coated in water or another watery substance like blood. And the explanation here is that water causes sand to lose its dryness and congeals it together. Likewise, because rubber does not conduct electricity, Luffy, who is a rubber man, can touch and hurt Enel, who is lightning, with his normal physical attacks. So again, so far so good. The first problem comes about because some people see this and then think that they can generalize this to all Logias, but that's just not the case. Light has no elemental weakness, magma has no elemental weakness, smoke has no elemental weakness. Some Logias are just exempt from this due to their nature. So whenever we are discussing a Logia, we have to first establish that they have an elemental weakness, rather than assuming so. Because when I bring up Kizaru for example, and a person says to me, well what about elemental jutsus or attacks? That's really just silly, because light has no elemental weakness. Now the second problem that comes about is when some people think that the Logias that do have an elemental weakness are all equally weak to it. Again, this is just not the case. So for example, Aokiji being ice, his elemental weakness should be fire or magma. Now, Akaino has said that his magma is superior to fire, and he has burnt Ace, who is literally fire. Now, this situation is a little nuanced, and I will speak more about it in another video, but at the very least, Akaino burning fire itself proves that he's not exaggerating. So as far as hot things go, we can comfortably say that Akaino's magma should be the elemental weakness of an ice user such as Aokiji. Now because of this, one category of response that I got was, well, what about fire or magma style jutsus? Now again, just taking context into account shows that this response makes no sense. Aokiji fought equally for 10 days straight against a magma user that is able to unintentionally and permanently set half an island on fire, form multiple volcanoes, and literally set water on fire. But somehow a fireball jutsu or Amaterasu is what's going to beat him? Come on guys. Context. Aokiji, even though he should have an elemental weakness, functionally has none, because his ice is so cold that he can neutralize most heat, which is why his side of Punk Hazard was not affected by Akaino. Then, the third problem is that some people think that they can just invent elemental weaknesses for characters. So for example, here we have a comment of someone suggesting that wood is an elemental weakness of Enel because dry wood is a poor conductor. But if you actually watched the anime or read the manga, you would see Enel literally getting stabbed through the head with a wooden stake and even conducting electricity through the wood to hurt Kamikiri. And also, here we have Enel literally evaporating and setting fire to giant trees and the ground beneath them with an L-Thor. Like, just because you can possibly imagine something to potentially be an elemental weakness does not mean it actually is. Elemental weaknesses are always clearly defined when they are present. You cannot just randomly assign an elemental weakness to a Logia because you think it should be the case. That's not how Logias work. Now the last argument that usually comes up is a grasping at straws type of thing. It seems as if some people do not want to accept the fact that Logias are impervious to almost every non-haki physical and elemental attacks. Now the specific instance that I often see being used to say that Logias are vulnerable to a variety of things is Whitebeard's Quake Punches hurting Akaino. Now everyone who reads or watches One Piece should know that pre-timeskip, Haki was not colored black. When Whitebeard stabbed through Aokiji, his blade was stated to be covered with Haki, and of course it wasn't colored. Garp was also shown to routinely use Haki against Luffy, and again it was not colored. Marco was also obviously using Haki when he kicked his arrow from the sky, and again it wasn't colored. The same is also obviously the case with when Jozu slammed Aokiji, causing him to bleed, and when Rayleigh fought against Kizaru, because as already said, pre-timeskip, Haki was not colored black. So now, some people are trying to make the case that Whitebeard, one of the pioneers of the New World, who would have routinely fought against Logias and other strong characters, knows that he should imbue his blade with Haki when he wants to hurt a Logia, but doesn't imbue his Quake Punches with Haki when attacking the person who just killed his son? I would not have thought that Oda would literally need to verbatim say that Whitebeard imbues his quakes with Haki for some people to accept this, given the obvious context we have. But here we are, I guess. Anyway though, it is obvious that Whitebeard does imbue his quakes with Haki. If more weaknesses or workarounds are added in the future, or if in upcoming chapters information comes out that shows that we should doubt some of the already established facts, then fine. But as of right now, to this date, to suggest that normal non-haki physical or elemental attacks can hurt a Logia in the absence of a specific elemental weakness is just being dishonest given the information we currently have. But anyway guys, those are the silly arguments that I wanted to speak about, because I'm tired of hearing them honestly. Let me know if I missed any, or if you feel like I got something wrong here in the comment section down below. And also, don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you like the video. But anyway, see you next time guys.